can tell he's very caring, always willing to help out whoever needs help.
This video is sponsored by Conflict of Nations, the free online strategy game happening in a modern global warfare. With Conflict of Nations, you'll take control of a real country in the late 20th and early 21st century and field the absolute most cutting-edge military technology.
So I have been
fight for world domination. I love taking on other players, and Conflict of Nations lets you face off against up to 128 other players in games. You'll have to use all kinds of different real-life units, including tanks, jets, and even nuclear submarines, in games that can take up to weeks to complete. Choose your strategy wisely, though. Will you focus on building up your country's economic might, or play the
So, okay, guys, we're gonna watch this. We're gonna react to what would happen in World War III.
Declaring war on everyone and rely on your military prowess. It's up to you, since with Conflict of Nations, you're truly in command of the country. Infographics show viewers get a special gift of 13,000 gold and 1 month of premium subscription for free.
I don't watch this crap. Come on. I want to see what happens when World War III happens.
So click the link, choose a country, and start fighting your way to victory right now.
Chicago would be the problem.
Hour 1. In the Pacific, Chinese amphibious invasion forces stream out of civilian and military ports along the eastern
Chicago
the massive
or Detroit would be the problem we have to worry about. Because we're not from Chicago.
With reinforced ramps to allow them to.
I'll say one thing though, guys. If World War III actually did happen, guys, the biggest concern I would have is the these three cities. Now, according to what I've seen on old world records online stuff, I think I heard, I would have to be worried if they hit Chicago, Detroit, or Indianapolis. Now, people say between anyone from Chicago, Indianapolis, or Detroit, a 400 to 500 mile radius. Now, before I start watching this crap, because I know this is gonna be fake, I know this is all fake, and if you listen to some old warnings that people make up and stuff, they say Chicago, Detroit, or Indianapolis, a 400 mile radius. That doesn't kind of work for me because I live about 300 miles. Okay, now I live 2.5 miles from Detroit and Chicago, both ways. I live 300 miles from Indiana. I live about 300 miles from Indianapolis, so that would not work for me. If this happened, I know what to do. Go to a basement. That's all I know. Shut the windows, turn the air conditioner off, go to the basement. I mean, I got enough water, I got some food here, but that's about all I got. I have a couple radios around here. I heard by rules, we take the weather radio, go downstairs. That's the first thing I do. And do a video saying goodbye to the world. That's what I do. Besides that, here we go.
On and offload heavy military vehicles. This first wave of invaders is 35,000 strong, and many more tens of thousands of soldiers are waiting for their turn to make the 100-mile journey to Taiwan.
Really?
Chinese frigates scour the waters of
Taiwan's only 100 miles from China?
On the hunt for American or Taiwanese submarines. A formal declaration of war against Taiwan is being declared as the ships cut through the waves. And though no declaration of war against the United States is prepared, it's fully expected that the United States will honor its commitment to defend Taiwan from invasion.
I thought Taiwan was British territory.
Strait that doesn't belong to the People's Liberation Army Navy will be considered hostile and fired upon. A world away, Russian forces staging out of Belarus and the Western Military District launch an offensive into the Baltic.
They're already attacking Ukraine right now. You guys want the window up for you? Whistle's being a pain. What do you do? Whistle up window for you? Okay, move. Hey, you're cooking in the house all day. You've been good all now. Okay, guys, so let's go back to doing what we're doing. Now, I'm reacting to this. I have not seen this yet, but so right now they're already taking over. Right now they're already taking over Ukraine. Right now, this came out. Oh, this came out recently. This came out just before. This just came out this one time. Which country took over? Russia, Ukraine.
Countries. The featureless flat plains of Eastern Europe are perfect tank country in favor of the attacker.
So they take over Ukraine, Latvia, Livia, and Estonia. So Estonia right now.
Out of Belarus and the Western Military.
Latvia and Lithuania. And Russia and Ukraine.
Flat plains
right now
are perfect tank country and favor the attacker with few natural features to build defenses on. Overhead, a barrage of missiles preempts the crossing of Russian troops into NATO territory. Hundreds of
Ooh.
ballistic and cruise missiles fly across Eastern Europe.
NATO
aimed
means
at NATO airfields, supply depots, and
Slovakia,
troop staging areas.
wow,
Just assured
everywhere.
facilities and other anti-missile defenses begin to light up the sky with their own counterfire. The average success rate of missile defense systems averages between 50 and 60%, but that still means
Yeah, and
is the perfect gift.
that means we get ready. That means I'd be ducking.
To your best friend, Amy.
I don't think. I think the way things going right now, guys. I think I might start deploying. I think we might start
Buy it as a gift.
drafting kids.
Godiva is chocolate.
Our best
Think to start drafting.
jigs are on sale
I don't
now
think
for a
they're. I don't think I'm
limited
going to go.
time. Save on the 720, our most advanced
Well, they told you
jig.
going. I'd tell them to go up themselves.
100 missiles find their targets, cratering airfields, destroying fuel depots, and killing hundreds on the ground.
They were doing it in Ukraine.
Blind the buildup of military troops by Russia. And the moment the first wave of missile strikes are detected and still in the air, NATO responds accordingly. The skies are so crowded with missiles for a few minutes that it's unsafe for NATO or Russia's combat air patrols to operate in the region, and they take to low altitude for safety. NATO's missiles have better precision than Russia's missiles, but Russian missile defenses are slightly more effective than NATO's. In the Pacific, China launches nearly 600 missiles in the span of an hour, the largest missile barrage in human history. These missiles target Taiwan's military and civilian airfields, hangars, command and control
That goes to the
nodes,
Philippines?
and electric power plants. However, a significant number of them also target American air bases in Guam, Japan, and South Korea. American and Taiwanese missile defenses put up a brave fight.
Code
but
red.
The overwhelming fire is too much.
DEFCON
Many
1.
of the missiles find their marks.
It would be
Guam
DEFCON
is
1.
cratered by ballistic missile strikes.
President-
and America's largest military base.
President better do something.
Out of commission. Thousands die on the ground. Further missile attacks target American naval vessels operating in the Pacific. China has needed 4 months to prepare its amphibious assault fleet, giving the world plenty of time to prepare for the coming war. The U.S. now operates 4 carrier groups in the Pacific, with a 5th in reserve along the American West Coast. As American satellites detect the start of the Chinese attack, a warning is sent across the entire American Pacific Fleet. The carriers now move at full speed, taking random and aggressive turns, all in an attempt to throw off the targeting of China's missiles. American cyber and electronic warfare operations, however, are already underway. Targeting China's recon and
NATO.
targeting assets,
Wait.
they succeed in
And
degrading
NSA,
the accuracy
and
of
it's
Chinese
everything.
missiles,
Everything
but
else should be on high alert.
still
Even
makes them a
even
serious threat. As the
even
missiles re-enter
but
the
NASA
atmosphere
be on
at
high alert.
7,000 miles an hour, American missile defenses put up a wall of lead and steel, with escort cruisers knocking out Chinese missiles with their own SM-3 missiles. When the smoke clears, 1 American carrier has been sunk, 2 have been seriously damaged, the 3rd has suffered only minor damage. Many of the carrier group escorts, however, are severely damaged or sunk. The U.S. Navy has just experienced the largest single-day loss of life in its history. Hour 2. On the ground in Eastern Europe, Russian forces are making contact with the first line of NATO defenses. The NATO Rapid Response Force has dug in best as it can along the eastern flank of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. But the flat ground doesn't give much defensive advantage to NATO. NATO tanks are on the whole more modern and more capable than Russian tanks, thanks to crippling sanctions imposed on Russia after its annexation of Crimea in 2014, and additional sanctions in 2022 after its invasion of Ukraine. Other than destroying the Russian economy, the blockade of computer chips from major manufacturers such as Taiwan have been a devastating blow to a military already suffering from worn out and poorly maintained equipment. This has had a cascading effect across the Russian military, as much of the smart tech of modern militaries relies heavily on computer components, which Russia is now forced to manufacture domestically. Everything from modern anti-tank missiles to air-to-air missiles and even fire control radar have a limited reserve supply and must be applied judiciously. The T-72 still makes the bulk of Russian forces, though in preparation for war, several thousand Cold War-era tanks have been activated. These tanks suffer from serious deficiencies against modern weapons and are largely used as cannon fodder by the Russians. Scores of T-55s, T-62s, and T-64s smash into NATO defenses, soaking up anti-tank fire, while more modern T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s mop up exhausted defenders. Casualties are horrendous for the Russians, but they have plenty of outdated equipment to throw into the fight. NATO's tanks are far more capable than most Russian tanks,
there are
but
tanks.
they're also more expensive and significantly fewer in number. The United States is still in the process of shipping the bulk of its armored forces to Europe, but it'll be several weeks yet before significant amounts of American armor is ready for combat. For now, Europe must hold the line long enough for the U.S. to bring its full firepower into the fight, assisted, of course, by a few thousand advanced American forces stationed in Europe. Combat in the air is just as intense on the ground. Within minutes of the war's start, both sides' air forces took to the skies. Russian MiGs are capable aircraft, but again facing serious modernity problems from a lack of funding. However, while the Russian army has a reputation earned in Ukraine for poor tactics, communications, and performance,
They
the
destroyed the
Russian
big
Air
girl
Force
too.
remains a competent and credible threat to NATO. Both sides are unable to bring the full power of their air forces to bear against each other. For NATO planes, the threat comes from Russia's numerous air defense batteries, which operate close to the front lines and can even threaten NATO planes from within Russia's borders. The S-400 system ranks among the best air defense systems in the world and is lethal to NATO's fourth and 4.5 generation fighters. At immediate and close range, numerous self-propelled air defense guns shore up S-400 and older S-300 defenses. NATO, on the other hand, relies heavily on fighters and interceptors for air defense, whom themselves are at risk from Russian ground-based defenses. However, NATO enjoys one distinct advantage over Russia: the F-35 stealth fighter and America's fleet of F-22 air supremacy fighters. Unfortunately, only a few hundred F-35s are capable of combat operations across the NATO alliance, and most of these are from the United States. The vaunted F-22, the most capable air supremacy fighter in the world, is also in very low numbers, and most of them are being diverted to bases in the Pacific for sea and air war against China. Entire fleets of American aircraft are already making the Atlantic crossing with the aid of tanker planes, but it'll be a day or two yet before they're ready for combat ops. Europe's lack of stealth fighters means they can't safely operate near the front lines, temporarily giving the air advantage to Russia. Russia presses that advantage as best it can, but carrying out strike missions over the front lines is still
Well, the U-2. Can the U-2 bomber do anything?
Russian bombers devastate NATO defenses, but take casualties of their own. Long-range standoff attacks via air-launched cruise missiles keep Russian pilots out of harm's way. NATO responds with its own long-range strikes, but for now, the air over the front belongs to Russia. Attack helicopters from both sides fight ground defenses and each other all across the front. It'll take time yet for NATO to gather its forces, and the numbers advantage is once more in Russia's favor. Still, both sides suffer heavy losses of air cavalry to man-portable air defense weapons and traditional air defenses both. As the second hour of World War III comes to a close, a massive offensive on the military enclave of Kaliningrad pushes into NATO defenses in southern Lithuania. Further cruise and ballistic missile attacks rain out Kaliningrad and into it from NATO return fire. The overwhelming amount of NATO firepower aimed at Kaliningrad quickly shuts down any hope of conducting air operations out of the enclave. But it's still a strong point of tens of thousands of Russian troops in armor who are manning defenses along the Polish border, while a separate thrust north into Lithuania seeks to destroy
Poland.
Russia's hope is to sever NATO from the Baltic countries, and there's little the alliance can do to prevent that.
Sweden and Finland are joining NATO.
Begun the bombardment of the Penguin Islands, silencing naval defenses there. The massive amphibious assault force has crossed most of the Taiwan Strait, and the island fortress nation is now in sight. Overhead, Chinese fighters battle Taiwan's rapidly diminishing air force for supremacy, while other strike aircraft carry out SEAD operations for suppression of enemy air defenses. Taiwan is equipped with very robust air defenses courtesy of America.
Good.
They take a heavy toll on the Chinese aircraft. China has over 2,000 combat aircraft, however, and is easily able to
make more.
Controlled by gas. There's only one way out. The Skill Power 440 yard equipment. Its advanced lithium battery technology is just as powerful as gas. Ditch the gas, keep the power. With Skill.
I don't care. I'll stick.
I'm Mike Rowe. You got a new show called The Story Behind the Story with Matt Idles. Saturdays at 9, and I've seen them, and they look great.
I'll arrive to the audition.
To absorb the punishment. Lurking under the waves, though, the Chinese fleet runs into a coordinated Taiwanese and American ambush. U.S. and Taiwanese subs have been powered down, lurking silently and awaiting the fleet's approach. And now, with the lead ships in range, they begin to open up on the Chinese Navy. Each submarine acts independently, but with attacks coming from multiple directions, there's little the Chinese ships can do to avoid destruction. Chinese anti-submarine warfare aircraft have been patrolling the strait for hours now, but the Chinese Navy's anti-submarine warfare capabilities have serious deficiencies. Their biggest problem, though, is that they're up against American Virginia-class submarines and Taiwan's electric diesel boats, both extremely quiet. Multiple Chinese vessels are sunk or heavily damaged, and in the chaos, the invasion fleet spreads so as to avoid becoming an easy target. And that's when they run into hundreds of anti-ship mines deployed in advance by the Taiwanese Navy. The cost to the Chinese Navy is staggering, a satisfying payback for the losses the U.S. Navy suffered during China's ballistic missile barrage. But the sheer number of Chinese vessels means the invasion will carry on. Exposed by their attacks, the submarines make for a quick exit from the strait. They won't all make it, as Chinese destroyers and ASW aircraft score several hits. Hour 4. The air battle over Eastern Europe intensifies as both sides continue carrying Sea operations
I'd be on
against each other.
CNN or Fox News right now watching this. This is real.
Critical importance as it's the best way to support outnumbered troops on the ground. Keeping NATO aircraft off the front is just as important for the Russian military to ensure the success of their ground forces. Without air superiority, the advantage is in the Russians' hands. Knowing that they couldn't guarantee the safety of strike aircraft against NATO's technologically advanced military, Russia has placed a focus on ground fire support platforms over air.
China, this is happening is like what? Slim to none? This would never happen to us, guys. We're safe.
I'm not sure, like, however many years there will ever be any process in that, as you say, Rosa.
Fox News.
Rosa, thank you very much.
Bill, by talking about learning how to use different weapons, different guns, as he was growing up, as so many young boys and girls.
So you get the whole thing to yourself.
Because it's cool.
Chances of that happening here, guys, like I said, is very slim if it actually happened. But if it did, World War III actually happened, guys, I'd be ready for it.
Platforms. Russia's infantry is typically supported by far greater amounts of artillery than a comparable NATO unit.
To explore like more than just LA, like any.
Limitations. Russia's forces are unable to exploit openings in the enemy's defenses for fear of outrunning their ground-based fire support and air defenses. As NATO forces
How's Ukraine doing for you guys? You can't get it yet.
NATO warplanes patiently wait for any Russian forces foolish enough to advance too quickly for their air defenses to protect. The Ukrainian war highlighted serious command and control issues for the Russian military.
Still working on it right now.
Steps have been taken to correct the problem. Russian forces facing full-on electronic warfare from NATO and often out of contact with leadership for long periods of time occasionally move out of step with the rest of the advance. Those that do are immediately pounced on by NATO ground strike aircraft, who circle behind the front lines like hungry sharks. The bulk of the Russian force, however, maintains operational integrity and moves at a predetermined maximum advance rate, so as to keep under the protection of their ground-based fire support and air defenses. This makes their advance slow and predictable, though, a fact that the vastly outnumbered NATO forces take full advantage of. Heavily damaged NATO units are able to withdraw and avoid full destruction, allowing them to regroup and redeploy.
Yes.
However, NATO has its own issues. Russian electronic warfare capabilities are wreaking havoc on NATO communications, and the fact that the alliance speaks over 24 different languages creates great difficulty coordinating the various components of the NATO defense force. English and French are the official languages of NATO, and most senior officers know one or both of them to ensure continuity of operations. But as communications are degraded and casualties mount, a lack of understanding makes it difficult for smaller
German,
teams to operate together on the battlefield.
Turkish,
the alliance is reeling
Polish,
from the onslaught and
German.
slowly but steadily losing ground. In the Pacific, American air power has yet to make an entry into the fight over Taiwan. Runways across South Korea, Japan, and even the Philippines face ongoing strikes from long-range Chinese missiles. The attacks have largely grounded air forces in the region, but they've come at a high cost by galvanizing Japan to join the fight. South Korea maintains neutrality despite attacks on 2 U.S. bases in its country and the death of some South Korean civilians and military personnel in the strikes. They are too preoccupied with a possible North Korean invasion instead. The Philippines remain similarly neutral despite their defense pact with the United States. Wary of joining the U.S. against China, countries all across the South Pacific are delaying their decisions on which side to back.
Myanmar.
Confidence in the U.S. victory is shaken by the losses incurred by America in the opening hours of the conflict. There is growing doubt that the U.S. will be able to effectively fight off the Chinese assault, as China's Navy and rocket forces keep U.S. forces at bay indefinitely. Backing the U.S. now could have disastrous consequences in the New World Order in the Pacific led by China. Australia, however, is fully committed to its mutual defense pact with the U.S., and its forces prepared for deployment into the South Pacific. However, neither Japan nor Australia undertake any major air operations against China, instead ensuring territorial integrity and patrolling against any Chinese aerial incursion. Despite fears China would attack disputed Japanese
technically, if Australia, the Queen said, help them out.
Invasion of Taiwan.
Depends what the Queen says too.
Base defenses rain hell on a swarm of Chinese amphibious assault vessels. The battle for Taiwan is on. China has decided to hit 3 different beaches simultaneously, 2 in the north and 1 in the south of the island. Because of the difficult undersea geography and suitability of the island's coast, there are only a few beaches where an amphibious assault is possible, and Taiwan has invested billions in their defense. Chinese forces first hit Gold Beach, the code word for a landing site outside of Taoyuan City. Short-based batteries and mobile artillery open up on the approaching landing craft. Missiles streak into the sky, targeting the amphibious assault ships and their escorts over a dozen miles offshore. Landing craft and amphibious vehicles are being sunk by the dozens before the first finally makes it to the beach. By the time the first Chinese soldier steps foot on the Taiwanese mainland, 600 of his compatriots have already been killed or drowned. He doesn't fare much better, almost immediately getting gunned down by a hidden machine gun.
No duh. That's how.
Get ready to turn everything you know about sun care upside down.
30's not good.
With Native. Simple, clean,
30 doesn't work.
A barrage of grenades destroys landing craft and all the men inside it. But there's many more landing craft coming. Gradually, the lead elements of the assault make
Still, we win.
landfall. But as the bulk of the assault force crosses an invisible line, the ocean suddenly erupts in flames. Hidden along the seafloor are long pipes through which the defenders pump raw oil. The oil floats to the surface before being set on fire, creating a raging inferno that floats along the top of the waves. The heat kills dozens of Chinese soldiers, even from inside the protection of their landing crafts. Large fan-powered landing ships carrying armored vehicles catch on fire and begin to sink as the rubber skirts deflate. The losses are horrendous, but still
Hovercrafts
keeps coming. Overhead, Chinese strike aircraft do what they can to neutralize the island's defenders, wiping out artillery positions with precision-guided weapons. However, many of these planes don't survive their attack run, blown out of the sky by Taiwan's robust air defenses. But the Chinese military has more planes than Taiwan has air defenses, and inevitably air defense sites are destroyed one by one through a combination of missile strikes and bombing runs. Taiwan's best defenses are its mobile defenses, self-propelled artillery and short-range air defense batteries. These prove difficult to track and pin down and are a deadly threat to scout aircraft trying to sniff them out. Taiwan's own air force rises to the occasion, but it's hopelessly outnumbered. Regardless, the island's defenders continue to put aircraft into the sky, operating from highways as most airfields in the country have now been damaged or effectively shut down. A half hour after the assault on Gold Beach begins, the Chinese open a second front directly north of Taipei. This assault meets with equally intense resistance, and huge Type 72 landing ships with bellies full of tanks and infantry fighting vehicles race to the beach. The second assault forces Taiwan to split its reserves as it rushes to ensure the Chinese can't gain a foothold. But Chinese airstrikes are making it difficult to quickly move troops around. A volley of missiles fly out from the beach and smash into the lead Type 72, causing massive damage to the ship and sinking it. The wrecked ship, heavily laden with troops and equipment, sinks quickly in the shallow water, and a second landing ship runs straight into the wreck, tearing its hull open. It too will sink in less than a minute, creating an artificial barrier for the ships. Regardless, though, more ships continue the assault, and despite the withering fire, manage to make it to the beach. Ramps at the front open, and the Chinese tanks and IFVs begin to pour out, to immediately be met by a flurry of American-made Javelin anti-tank missiles. Reactive armor on the Chinese tanks tries to deflect the incoming warheads, but are largely unsuccessful against many of the most sophisticated tank-killing weapons in the world, and the U.S. has provided thousands to Taiwan in anticipation of this invasion. A dozen miles away, Chinese air assault forces zip toward the coast in assault helicopters. To avoid air defenses, the pilots are flying at just above wave-top height in a daredevil sprint to get past the beaches. The moment they near land, though, they're forced to pull up to clear trees and buildings, which makes them easy targets for shoulder-fire air defense weapons. Numerous Chinese helicopters are blown.
Guess what?
I'm just trying to figure out. So I was just the phone decrease. Okay. What's the phone? Okay. And also just want to. So I'll just leave it on. Yeah, pretty much. Okay, guys, we're done.